Hello, I'm Alina, Polyakova, President and CEO of the Center for European Policy Analysis. Welcome for this very timely, very urgent conversation that we're hosting today in conversation and partnership with our friends at the Free Russia Foundation to talk about the situation developing in Russia with the recent arrest of Russia's main opposition leader, Alexey Navalny. I'm delighted to have with me today two people who are the best for this discussion. They have worked in Russia as opposition politicians. Vladimir Milov, who joins me here, is in fact an advisor to Alexey Navalny and is himself a Russian opposition politician. Vladimir Kara-Murza, a friend and a colleague I've known for many years, also a Russian opposition politician and vice president at the Free Russia Foundation. Vladimir Milov, Vladimir Kara-Murza, thank you for joining us. Vladimir Milov, you're in Moscow, so let me start with you. What are the latest facts? I think most Americans know that Alexey Navalny is Russia's main opposition leader, that he landed in Russia after recovering from an attempt on his life, a poisoning by Novichok, the same nerve agent that was deployed by the Kremlin in the United Kingdom some years ago at this point. And now he returns to Russia and he's arrested, getting off his plane. Why was he arrested, and what is happening to Alexey Navalny today?
Thank you so much. It's great being with you. And just a few legal facts. First, what we're talking about, his arrest is linked to probation on the so-called Ivrache case, which the sentence which was issued in December 2014, more than 6 years ago, and his probation term had actually expired on the 30th of December last year. As a matter of fact, this case was overturned by European Court on Human Rights. There was a specific decision which had explicitly ruled that this case has never had any economic substance behind it and was only politically motivated to specifically persecute Navalny as an opposition leader. And also, there is a letter, I can send you a link, it's widely available and open on the internet, from the Ivrache branch in Russia itself, which says we never actually suffered any harm from cooperation with the company set up by Mr. Navalny and his brother. The services they supplied was by average market prices. There was nothing excessive in that, and we don't have any complaints. So it's a letter which was presented at court but disregarded by the Russian courts. Now, as to what is happening right now, I strongly advise you to read, I can send you a link. There was a thread by Lisa Vogt. She's a journalist at the BBC Russian service. She actually summed up, a Russian branch of BBC had published a detailed legal analysis of what's going on. And actually they point out that there is no such thing in any legislation in Russia as putting anybody in jail for 30 days for violating the probation rules. We're not even mentioning that these rules were not violated and the probation expired, but even the legislation says that you cannot put there is not a norm in Russian legislation which says that you can't put anybody for 30 days in jail for violating the probation rules. And also important, Navalny was convicted on 2 articles of the Russian Criminal Code in 2014. Now, since that, one of these articles had actually been canceled by new amendments to the legislation. It's not valid anymore. The second is subject to amnesty in connection to one of the, we have this annual amnesties connected to anniversary of victory in the Second World War, the 9th of May, Russian Victory Day. So as a matter of fact, under both articles, he cannot be put in jail because one article is there no more. The other one actually subject to amnesty after Navalny was sentenced. So what happened, you also probably heard that this was, like Navalny said in this video comment from this courtroom, improvised courtroom, I have to say, because essentially they had torn apart the criminal process code. because Russian constitution and the criminal process code, they completely forbid this extraterritorial emergency courts. Court hearing has to be held inside a courthouse, not in the local branch of police in Khimki where it happened to Navalny. There has to be like proper notification, time allowed to respond, and so on. So, like, you know, anything, like each and every step in the due process was violated, which means that the only purpose behind what happened was Putin's hysterical desire to put Navalny in jail at any cost, not really allowing him to enter re-enter Russian political space freely, meeting his supporters, speaking what he has to say, and so on. Navalny knew that all along. This was brewing for some time, and he had multiple warnings in form of, you know, new criminal investigation on money laundering opened against him, the warnings from this it's called FSIN, which is the Russian service that administrates prison terms, essentially, which said that they want to put him in jail for violating the probation rules. This is actually why, the reason why they announced that, because Navalny obviously was brought unconscious to Germany and stayed there for treatment. At this time, Russian government version is that he should have appeared in Russia to actually, you know, verify his presence under probation term. Because he didn't show up, he was absent. This is the reason why they want to put him in jail. So this is all. Yeah.
So I mean, I just want to go back to what you said, that every step in due process was violated here. I think that's really important, because what we see now is what you said, the Kremlin, especially Mr. Putin, have completely thrown out any even superficial adherence to law and order in order to put Alexey Navalny behind bars. Obviously, this comes after a failed attempt on his life by the Russian security services. And I think the question that many people are asking themselves now, and I want to come to you, Vladimir Kara-Murza, with this, you know, Navalny has been a part of Russian politics to the extent that he can be, despite what the Kremlin has done to block his ability to really participate in politics properly. But he's been, you know, using and mobilizing wherever platforms are available to him, especially on social media, very effectively. And the question is, why now? You know, why at all costs, as you said, Vladimir Milov, throwing out the legal criminal code, this sham so-called trial, the 30 days, why now? Vladimir Kara-Murza, what are your thoughts?
I think it's to add to everything that Vladimir Milov has just described in terms of the Kafkaesque pseudo-legal proceedings that the Russian authorities are using against Alexei Navalny. You know, the sort of the ultimate symbolism of this is that this makeshift so-called court session that took place yesterday, there was a portrait of the Stalin-era NKVD chief Genrikh Yagoda hanging on the wall in that room. I think nobody could find a better symbol for what's actually happening today in terms of the persecution of Alexei Navalny. For the past few weeks, you ask, Alina, why now? For the past several weeks now, the Russian authorities have been signaling to Alexei not to return to Russia. As Vladimir mentioned, they've opened this new criminal case while he was away. They announced that there's a search warrant issued against him while he was in Germany. Several other announcements were made for the purpose of him not returning to the country, because, you know, back since the times of Yuri Andropov, who was KGB chairman in the 1970s, the authorities realized that the most effective way of fighting the opposition, of fighting dissenters, is not actually to arrest them or to imprison them, but to kick them out of the country. We saw that happen back in the 70s with Solzhenitsyn, with Bukovsky, with so many others. And Andropov, in fact, did come to the conclusion that this was the most effective way, because once a political leader or a dissident leader is away, he or she loses not only the connections, but most importantly, the sort of the moral authority to continue to do what they're doing. And this is exactly the case today. We see that those Russian opposition politicians who have left in recent years, they basically lost relevance on Russian political scene. And so I remember back in September when Alexei just awoke from his coma at the Berlin hospital, and he announced for the first time that he will be going back to Russia, I was inundated by calls from Western journalists asking me to comment on this sensation, as they put it. And I say that not only don't I see any kind of sensation here, I don't see any news. It was always obvious that Alexei Navalny was going to return. A Russian politician's place is in Russia. It could not have been any other way. I remember well that there was never any question in my mind after both of my poisonings in 2015 and 2017 that I will return to Russia. And I took, put myself on the plane as soon as doctors allowed me to fly and went back both times for this very reason, because there's no better gift, I think, those of us who are in opposition to Putin can give him than to leave the country. That's what they want us to do. And Alexei Navalny was never going to do that. So there was never any question that he was not going to come back. Of course, now that he did come back, they had to arrest him after all of their own announcements, after all of their own pseudo-legal steps that they took, all the measures that were accompanying this. I mean, Vnukovo airport looked like it was under military siege on Sunday. And of course, in the end, they rerouted the plane to land him at a different airport. And then we had all those sham court procedures that Vladimir Milov just described. This coming Saturday, there is a demonstration planned on Pushkin Square that Alexei Navalny himself has called for. In those few seconds, he had to record the video after the sham court proceedings. But you asked, Alina, about the international reaction. It was very important in the last few days to hear very strong, very powerful, very high-level statements, both from the leaders of the European Union and from the leaders of the United States, including the incoming national security advisor to future President Biden, Jake Sullivan, who reacted literally within 2 hours of the arrest of Alexei Navalny with a very powerful statement. There were a series of bipartisan statements coming from Congress on both sides of the aisle, from people who I don't think agree with each other on anything else, but they were unanimous in the condemnation of what the Putin regime was doing in relation to Alexei Navalny. It's very important that this does not stop at words and statements and goes to actual practical reaction. Well, the first thing that needs to happen is the US government, the incoming US administration, actually needs to comply with American law and impose mandatory sanctions on the Putin government for violating the Chemical Weapons Convention. Back in the fall of 2020, there were congressional requests made from the bipartisan leadership of the Foreign Affairs and Foreign Relations committees in the House of Representatives and in the Senate to the Trump administration, calling for mandatory sanctions, which have to happen under US law, the Chemical Weapons Prohibition Act, against any signatory country to the Chemical Weapons Convention that violates this convention, which clearly happened in the case of the poisoning of Alexei Navalny by a state-produced military-grade nerve agent, Novichok. The 60 days have lapsed long ago. There has been no response. So the Trump administration is actually in plain violation of US law as it comes to mandatory sanctions under the Chemical Weapons Prohibition Act. So I hope and I fully expect, in fact, the incoming US administration to comply with its own law and to impose those mandatory sanctions. But of course, there is much more that needs to be done. And the best answer to your question was actually provided by Alexei Navalny himself, who in the days before his return home, discussed with his colleagues, and one of his closest colleagues, Vladimir Ashurkov, published this yesterday, discussed with his colleagues the need for targeted Western sanctions against the key officials and the key oligarchs of the Putin regime, who basically hold the Kremlin's dirty money and who hold it in most cases in the West. Alexei said that the reason that a lot of the sanctions are not working currently is because they're not targeted at the right people. And there is, in fact, a list of individuals that Vladimir Ashurkov released yesterday on behalf of Alexei Navalny and a whole organization, mentioning people like Roman Abramovich, or Alisher Usmanov, or Andrei Kostin, or Igor Shuvalov, and some other key figures in and around the Kremlin, the people who have made the habit of stealing in Russia and then stashing away that stolen money in Western banks and Western jurisdictions. And for years, the West has tolerated this. Let's call things for what they are. This needs to stop. This corrosive import of kleptocracy and corruption from the Putin regime and its oligarchs to the West needs to stop. This is what Alexei Navalny has called for. This is what he's been calling for a long time. In fact, a few weeks ago, we had the honor of testifying before the European Parliament Foreign Affairs Committee. Alexei was there, Vladimir Milov was there, Ilya Yashin was there, and I was there. We were invited as representatives of the Russian opposition to testify before members of the European Parliament, and that was exactly the message. Go after the Kremlin dirty money, go after the Kremlin kleptocracy, stop this intolerable situation of Western enabling of this rotten vertical of corruption and kleptocracy built by Vladimir Putin. Go after the money, go after the kleptocrats. That is what needs to happen now. By various estimates, there is around $1 trillion of private Russian assets, a lot of them linked to Vladimir Putin personally, that are stashed away in Western jurisdictions, either US or US allies. Something needs to happen about this. And I hope that now that the whole world has seen what the Putin regime is doing to its most prominent opponent, I hope that there will be not only words, but also action.
And I think the courage of Alexey Navalny and also people like you, Vladimir and Vladimir, has to be matched with equally courageous action from our policymakers in Washington and also in European capitals and along the ways you describe. Vladimir Milov, let me come back to you. Vladimir Kara-Murza just talked about how there was never a question that Alexey Navalny would go back to Russia. This was no surprise. You're coming to us from Moscow, if I'm not mistaken. To me, it seems like the Kremlin has really made some serious mistake in its desire to suppress opposition voices in Russia. Because of what they did to Alexey Navalny, and unfortunately many others, including Vladimir Kara-Murza on our line here today, and trying to, through murderous ways and schemes, to get them out of the public eye, but now has had the opposite effect. I think Navalny has in many ways now become an international household name in a way that he was not before. And now he's back in Russia, he seems to have a greater platform than he did before all of this happened. What's your sense of that? To me, to us sitting in the West, his influence seems to have risen because of the Kremlin's desire to silence him. But is that the case in Russia? How are Russians responding to what is happening today? How are people seeing this most recent brazen violation of the law, this attempt on someone's life just for speaking out? How is that being seen from Russia today?
First, I think it's important to understand the background on which all this is happening, because I think Putin probably would have behaved in a more relaxed way should he had his former strength and popularity, which he enjoyed, let's say, 10 years ago. Navalny was already very popular, was criticizing him, but nothing of that sort happened. Now, what has changed is that we are right now well into a second decade without economic growth. People's real incomes have declined for 7 or stagnated for 7 consecutive years. And there's no prospect of all this improving. There was a great mobilization in Putin's support when he was reinstalled in power 3 years ago, and later last year with the constitutional plebiscite. People were promised, like, after we vote for all this, happiness will come and Russia will become great again in the modern day American political language. But nothing of that sort happened. We're still, not only we're still in the same ruins as we have been for years, but people also realize that government and Putin personally basically quickly abandoned them after just another vote in mobilization of Putin's support. I think after this happened second time with the constitutional vote last year, many people had got mad because they have been promised a lot and nothing of that sort really happened. So Putin's approval ratings, ruling party approval ratings are at historic lows. At the same time, in 8 months, we are due to have parliamentary elections, which is going to be an extremely difficult exercise because it's not about electing president, but it's about voting for the party which had completely discredited itself after 20 years in power. It's considered a party of bureaucrats, party of thieves, and actually it's very hard to go out on the street and actually get to find somebody who would support this party. We actually did this. We filmed a few videos of that sort. You can see that in Moscow, in provinces, everybody turns away when he only hears United Russia. So that's the background. And for Putin, it's extremely dangerous if there's a strong leader which leads this anti-United Russia campaign in the parliamentary elections, posing United Russia with the risk of losing majority in parliament for the first time since 2003. So this, the attitude in society is very clear. You can see that from the recent developments in Khimki, where Navalny was trialed. It was very cold, freezing cold in Moscow, over -20°C. And Khimki is not one of these, central opposition-minded districts in Moscow. It's a town outside Moscow city, and this is particularly a very residential area, very conventional, nothing specific. But people were letting in everybody into their houses, actually bringing them hot tea, showing sympathy. There's a great video of an elderly woman coming out of one of these buildings and actually angrily shouting at policemen, saying, "Who do you serve? Do you serve the people or this mafia dictatorship?" This is widely circulated online. So the situation Navalny right now is discussed everywhere, like in an absolutely apolitical forums and chats, even the parental chats in kindergartens and schools, like everybody discusses that, and people clearly understand what is going on. There is no second thought. There are some who still are unconvinced, but majority really understand what Putin did to his major political opponent.
So Vladimir Kara-Murza, I want to give you the last word here, because it seems to me from everything that Vladimir Milov just said, the Kremlin, in its attempt to try to weaken Navalny, has actually strengthened him. And it seems quite significantly, because we know that for years, Navalny and others didn't have the kind of access you need to media, for example, in Russia, because the media is so controlled by the government in Russia that there's very few avenues to reach, your average sort of Russians outside of Moscow, outside of major cities. And of course, the Navalny campaign and the organization that he started started to mobilize outside these major cities in the provinces. And it was starting to get some movement. And then of course, the government quickly tried to shut that down. But now this seems like it's given the movement, it's given Navalny and his name and his cause, and the cause, I think, of all Russian people, to have a more free society and to have choice in their political leaders. It seems like it has given this new life across the country. Like Vladimir Milov said, this is what everyone is talking about. Do you think that is the case? Do you think that now going forward, we're going to see more people come to protest that Alexey Navalny calls? There are already many coming before. Are we going to see some shift in the dynamics of power in Russia? Are people going to become perhaps more politicized or more political in their day-to-day? What are your thoughts on the future?
Absolutely yes to everything you've just said, and the Kremlin is clearly shooting itself in the foot with everything that it's doing with Alexei, because his voice has now become even more powerful, even more authoritative, especially in the run-up to the parliamentary election that we're going to have on September 19th of this year, which Vladimir Milov just mentioned. I mean, one of the most effective things Alexei and his organization have been able to do in recent years was to organize tactical voting to send pro-Putin candidates, pro-Kremlin candidates to defeat in elections, local and regional elections all over the country, even when real opponents are actually removed from the ballot ahead of time, which is what usually happens in Russia. Of course, Navalny himself is not allowed to run in elections. His party has received 9 denials of registration from the Ministry of Justice. But even when there's no real opposition on the ballot, in so many cases, pro-Kremlin candidates are losing, and losing in a humiliating fashion, as happened, for example, in the Moscow City Duma election in 2019, where in nearly half the districts, candidates supported by the ruling party went to humiliating defeats to literally nobodies, just no names, some technical spoilers who happened to be on the ballot. This happened again in local elections last year. And of course, one of the main priorities for Alexei Navalny and his movement is to organize similar tactical voting to defeat incumbent pro-Kremlin lawmakers in the national parliament, in the State Duma, in September of this year. And this is what they're going to focus their efforts on in the coming months. And his voice, Alexei's voice in this, is going to become even more powerful. And we have seen, I want to come back to the point that Vladimir Milov was making. You really see a market shift in Russian public opinion in recent years, even if we accept those, really high approval figures for Vladimir Putin, which, are really dubious in my mind to talk about opinion polling in an authoritarian system where many people would be hesitant to naturally state their views about the government. all the more striking is the way the public opinion is turning away now from this regime and from supporting it. I mean, we see figures such as, 59% in a recent Levada Center poll advocating for comprehensive change in the country. 62%, nearly 2/3 of Russians who want to age limit Putin out of the presidency in 2024. We see what's most important, perhaps, Vladimir was talking about, the people in Khimki and how they reacted during this sham court proceeding. I have to say it's striking to see how people are beginning, certainly in big cities like Moscow, beginning to react in their daily life in terms of not hiding anymore their negative opinions about the regime. Just before I left for the holidays from Moscow, just before the new year, Putin had his annual press conference, this stage managed event that he has nationally televised live, of course, on all television networks. And it was amazing, to see random people, taxi drivers, people in grocery stores, somebody who sat in a notary's office, openly and publicly, manifesting their negativity towards this man. I mean, anybody can get people fed up with them after they were in power for 21 years. And we can clearly see that this is happening in Russia. And so I think the next few years will be really important in terms of bringing political change to our country. And it is, of course, needless to say, only for us Russians to affect any political change in Russia. It should not and cannot be done by any outside forces, but it is important that the world's democracies take a principled stand, not only in economic matters. We spoke already about the need to stop enabling the Kremlin kleptocracy and its export abroad, but also in political matters too. For example, in this coming parliamentary election, if it is patently fraudulent, as everybody expects it to be, if regime opponents are barred from the ballot ahead of time, as they usually are, there should be very clear non-recognition of its result and non-recognition of so-called lawmakers that are elected as a result of this quote-unquote election. And going forward, even more importantly, in 2024, well, Vladimir Putin is likely to try to remain in power beyond the end of his current and supposedly final presidential mandate. Vladimir mentioned this so-called plebiscite that Putin conducted under the cover of the pandemic in the summer of 2020. Even by the very low standards of Russian elections under Putin generally, this plebiscite was in a whole different league, with no public campaigning allowed against the constitutional amendments, with a week-long voting held on park benches, in shopping trolleys, on car trunks, without any kind of independent domestic or international observation over the results. It was the most rigged, the most fraudulent electoral exercise in recent Russian history. The official results had nothing to do with the actual sentiment of Russian society. And there were, by the way, many more purely legal procedures that were broken in the course of making those constitutional amendments. And it is very important that if Putin does, in fact, seek another presidential term in violation of the constitutional term limit, which he illegally and illegitimately overturned in this plebiscite, there should be a very clear and very public policy of non-recognition on the part of Western democracies of this usurpation of power, the same kind that we saw with regard to Lukashenko in Belarus last year. There should be no double standard in this regard, and this should be made clear, in my view, and made clear right now.
I think certainly with the new administration in the United States, I hope there will be prioritization among many other priorities that certainly the Biden team has to take some of the concrete steps that you're recommending here today, Vladimir, because we cannot be enablers any longer when it comes to supporting the regime in authoritarian states like Russia, who exploit our financial institutions, have done so for years, and as a result maintain their grasp on power at home. And of course, secondly, on still buying into the illusion, or perhaps now the delusion, that there is something akin to elections in Russia today, when of course there are not, in the way that we think about it in a democratic society. So I want to thank both of you for joining me. Please stay safe, stay well, and appreciate you taking the time. Vladimir Milov from Moscow, advisor to Alexey Navalny, Russian opposition politician. Vladimir Kara-Murza, vice president of the Free Russia Foundation, our partner in this conversation, and himself, unfortunately, a frequent target of the Kremlin. And thank you for your courage. Thank you for your time. And we will continue the fight. And please, from all of us at CEPA, pass on our best and well wishes to Alexey and his family. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alina. Always good to join you.
Thank you, and goodbye.